She was just cleaning the sidewalk when a white woman deliberately splashed her with mud from a puddle. But someone was watching, and that changed everything. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching this video. The city stirred slowly under a gray morning sky, its towers wrapped in mist, sidewalks slick with the remnants of last night's rain. The world looked cold, wet, and indifferent, like it had no room for softness, no space for anyone walking on the edge of survival. The wind rolled low between buildings, carrying the sharp scent of exhaust and something faintly metallic, like iron and regret. At the southern edge of the Crownmark Business Center, a tall glass complex that pierced the skyline like a monument to power, Janice walked along the curb with practiced care. Her uniform, though clean, bore the wear of years. Faded navy fabric, the elastic of the waistband stretched thin, and the knees smoothed from repetitive kneeling. Her shoes were once black, but the leather had long surrendered to time, revealing seams that flinched every time water touched them. In one hand, she carried a mop, the handle slightly splintered, and in the other, a small nylon bag with a banana and half a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in reused foil. Her fingers, dry and chapped, curled tighter around the bag as she approached the maintenance entrance. A sharp gust of wind tried to snatch the edge of her jacket, but she didn't slow down. Time, for her, was currency, and tardiness was dead. A glint of white caught her eye. A car, sleek, pristine, purring like a predator, rounded the corner at an angle too sharp for the wet road. She saw it approach, but kept her pace. She had cleaned this stretch of sidewalk every morning for the past 3 years and knew where the dips and puddles were. Yet today, the puddle near the ramp had grown, fed by a broken gutter above and the night's long rain. Its reflection trembled like it knew something cruel was coming. Inside the vehicle, a woman's hand adjusted a pair of large designer sunglasses. Red lips curled in a satisfied smirk as she spotted the solitary figure in the blue uniform just beside the water's edge. Her name was Catherine Loring, heiress to the Loring fashion line and owner of the high-end boutique on Crownmark's first floor. Her days began with green smoothies, assistants adjusting her schedule, and private drivers waiting before she even descended her penthouse elevator. She saw Janice, and she remembered her. 3 days ago, Catherine had left her boutique late and caught sight of Janice inside the lobby, bent over, scrubbing at a corner of the marble. There had been no eye contact, no interaction, yet something about that woman's quiet presence had unsettled her. Not because she was threatening, but because she existed, calm, silent, and invisible. And Catherine had always despised reminders that not everyone needed attention to be whole. Now, seeing her again, standing by that puddle like she belonged near the edge of filth, Catherine made a choice. She didn't turn the wheel in warning. She didn't tap the brakes. She aligned the car, kept her speed steady, and smiled when the tires sliced through the puddle. A thick arc of cold, muddy water rose like a curtain and fell like judgment. It hit Janice head-on. The splash soaked her from chin to shin, splattering her uniform, face, and lunch bag in a filthy baptism. The banana rolled from her grip, landing with a sickening squish. Her mop handle clattered onto the concrete. The car halted only briefly. The tinted window lowered just enough for those red lips to reappear. "Watch where you loiter next time," Catherine called out sweetly, then rolled the window back up and sped away, her laugh trailing behind the exhaust. Janice stood still. The rain had stopped hours ago, but a drop slid from her cheek as if the sky had waited for this moment. She didn't wipe it. She didn't speak. She bent down, retrieved the banana with a quiet resignation, then the bag, then the mop. Her motions were steady, her breath shallow. Her eyes, though, held something deeper, a flinch that didn't reach the surface. Across the street, unnoticed, a young man leaned against a concrete pillar in a charcoal gray security uniform. His name tag read Adam, and to anyone walking by he was simply another member of the building's large security staff. Clean-shaven, short brown hair under his cap, clipboard in hand, he was a fixture in the background. But Adam was not a guard. Not really. He watched the entire thing. Not just the splash, but the choice behind it. The malicious angle of the car, the delay before the window rolled down, the cruelty in the voice. He had watched Janice flinch, not physically, but internally, in that subtle way people flinch when the world tells them they are small. His hand tightened on the clipboard. Behind his even gaze, something inside him clicked into motion. That woman, Catherine, had been at many of his father's board meetings. Her boutique was one of the most expensive tenants in the complex. She walked through this building like she owned more than the walls, and perhaps she did, in influence if not deed. But she had just made a mistake. She had done something unforgivable in front of the wrong person. Adam turned and walked back inside, slipping through a maintenance corridor unseen. He made a note on his phone. No names, just woman, janitor, splash, 7:42 a.m., check cameras. Meanwhile, Janice continued her route. She didn't go home to change. There was no time, and she had no second uniform with her. She rang the back entrance and nodded to the overnight doorman, who looked up in surprise but said nothing. No one said anything. The elevators were filled with people in pressed suits who looked through her. One woman wrinkled her nose at the wet smell, but never turned her head. In the janitorial closet on the basement level, Janice wrung out her uniform jacket in the utility sink. Brown water spiraled down the drain, followed by silence. She scrubbed her hands, then her face. The cold water bit at her skin. She looked at herself in the cracked mirror. There was mud at her temple. Her braid was damp and limp. Her sandwich was gone. But her eyes held. They did not break. Not today. She pulled out a plastic bag from her locker, her backup shirt. It was 2 sizes too big and carried the scent of bleach and lemon from old wash cycles. But it was dry. She slipped it on, tied the sleeves tighter, and grabbed her cart. Upstairs in the conference center, tables had to be wiped before the finance seminar began. Janice rolled her cart into the room, greeted no one, and began her work. She did not think about the splash. She did not allow it to take root. But deep inside, something had begun to stir. Not anger, not revenge, just a growing pressure, like a seed under soil waiting to push through concrete. By mid-morning, Janice had returned to the lobby to polish the entry floor. Her shoes squelched with each step, still damp inside. She knelt with her rag, elbow to marble, working rhythmically in wide, circular motions. Each pass left behind gleaming stone where dirt had once been. She didn't notice Adam watching her from the balcony above, clipboard in hand, face unreadable. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes following the curve of her arm as she moved. Her strength wasn't loud. It wasn't adorned with speeches or expressions. It was silent and persistent. The kind of strength that didn't announce itself because it was too busy enduring. He pulled out his phone again. This time he typed a single line. "Who is she? I want her full file." Quietly. That evening, long after the building emptied and the lights dimmed, Janice rode the bus home. She sat by the window, a towel on her lap to shield the seat from her still damp clothes. The lights of the city flickered on the surface of the window as she leaned her forehead against the cool glass. Across the aisle, a child laughed, his head tucked against his mother's shoulder. Janice smiled faintly. She imagined Malik asleep already, curled under the blanket she had patched 3 times. Her keys jingled in her pocket with every bump in the road. At home, the hallway smelled of cooked rice and detergent. She turned the key slowly, not wanting to wake her boy. Inside, she stepped out of her shoes and hung her uniform in the shower, pouring warm water over the stained fabric. Mud swirled into the drain again. She didn't cry. She sat at the edge of her son's bed, brushed the curls from his forehead, and whispered a prayer. Not for vengeance, not for justice. Just for the strength to wake up again. Far across the city, in a penthouse lined with art and glass, Catherine reclined in a white armchair, her manicured nails tapping against a wineglass. She had already forgotten the incident. To her, it had been a flicker, nothing more than a passing moment, like brushing dust off her sleeve. She believed she had put someone in her place. But what she didn't know was that someone had watched, and that someone did not forget. And in that difference, a storm had quietly begun. The next morning arrived with the same gray clouds that had hung low over the city the day before. But this time, the rain had passed, leaving only damp streets and a chill that seeped into clothes and bones. The air smelled of wet pavement and burnt coffee, the kind that lingered outside corner carts and bus stops. Inside a narrow apartment 3 blocks past the Crownmark Business Center, Janice stood in the tiny kitchen, carefully slicing a bruised apple into thin wedges and placing them in a reused plastic container beside a small triangle of cheese. Her son, Malik, still rubbing the sleep from his eyes, sat at the wobbly table, swinging his feet. He was 8, with a gap between his front teeth and a stubborn cowlick that refused to be brushed down. He watched her silently, his eyes already familiar with the rhythm of their mornings, the quiet, the efficiency, the subtle weight of a mother who always seemed to be bracing against something invisible. Janice handed him the lunchbox with a tired smile. She didn't speak much in the mornings. Words took energy, and hers needed to be rationed. She kissed the crown of his head, adjusted the hood of his jacket, and reminded him not to forget his homework folder. Then, after a quick glance at the time, she slipped into her uniform, still slightly damp from yesterday's hand-washing, and tied her shoes with the stiffness of someone who'd done it every day for years on sore knees. The fabric held the faintest trace of bleach and citrus, not unpleasant, but sharp in the cold. By the time she stepped onto the street, the city had already begun to thrum. Buses heaved to the curb, horns barked in the distance, and the sidewalks filled with sharp heels, phone calls, and the scent of expensive perfume. Janice kept her eyes down. She didn't try to make room for herself. She learned long ago that people didn't part for women in cleaning uniforms. If you wanted space, you had to take it quietly, without making others feel your presence. At the Crownmark building, she entered through the service corridor. The fluorescent lights flickered above as she passed a line of beige lockers and laundry carts filled with used towels. Her fingers found the lock on her own dented metal cabinet, and she placed her bag inside, noticing that the shelf had once again collected a film of dust. She made a mental note to wipe it down later. There were no greetings from her coworkers. Most of the janitorial staff worked in silence, communicating only in brief nods or glances. For some, it was shyness. For others, exhaustion. And for a few, like Tina, the senior cleaner who had worked the building for 6 years, it was something closer to resentment. Janice had never understood why, but she had stopped asking herself those kinds of questions long ago. That morning, the lobby was particularly busy. A conference for a group of international clients had turned the front of the building into a stream of suits, briefcases, and polished shoes. Janice moved between them like wind around stones, wiping fingerprints from glass panels, straightening chairs, collecting stray wrappers. No one noticed her. No one paused to thank her. She was part of the architecture, a necessary shadow. On the mezzanine above, Adam watched the scene unfold. From his vantage point, he saw everything. The impatient guests tapping their watches, the receptionist smiling through stress, and Janice gliding through it all like a silent metronome. She never paused, never rolled her eyes, never muttered under her breath. Even when a man in a navy blue suit nearly knocked her tray from her hands without acknowledging her existence, she only steadied it and moved on. It fascinated him, the way she existed in this world without demanding space. How her presence was felt only by the results of her labor: clean floors, clear windows, ordered furniture. And yet, for all her invisibility, she carried herself with a dignity that seemed more solid than the marble floors beneath her. Back in his private office, tucked behind the security hub and away from the public view, Adam opened a confidential personnel file. Her name stared back at him. Janice M. Allen. Age, 31. Employment, maintenance staff, Crownmark Business Center. Years employed, 3. No infractions. Perfect attendance. Emergency contact, none listed. Dependent. One minor child, Malik Allen, age 8. He sat back in his chair and studied the ID photo clipped to the top corner of the file. It was the same face from yesterday, but cleaner, more composed. Still, the eyes were the same. Watchful, steady, like she had learned to measure people long before they measured her. He remembered his mother then, not as she looked in the framed photos scattered throughout his penthouse, but as she had been when he was small, pulling her hair back with a rubber band, scrubbing the kitchen floor of a restaurant that never once acknowledged her by name. She used to carry the same look, like the world owed her nothing, and yet she still gave everything. That night, Adam requested access to the building's camera archives from the previous morning. With his position as the owner's son came certain privileges, and though he preferred to keep his identity low profile, he wasn't above using it when needed. He watched the footage in silence. The splash, the deliberate angle of the car, the moment the window rolled down. Catherine's smile, then Janice, standing still, soaked in filth, not crumbling, just continuing. Adam clicked pause and leaned forward, his fingertips pressed together beneath his chin. Meanwhile, Catherine floated through her day with her usual ease. Her boutique had a new window display, and she fussed over the lighting until the mannequins shimmered just so. She dismissed an intern for wearing a depressing shade of beige, then stormed out after discovering her assistant had bought the wrong brand of sparkling water. In her world, nothing was ever enough. Her reflection mattered more than her reputation, and kindness was a tool, one she rarely used. Later that evening, Janice returned home after her double shift. Her legs ached, her hands burned, but the rent was due in 3 days, and her paycheck barely stretched across groceries, school supplies, and bus fare. Malik had fallen asleep on the couch with a book on his chest. She covered him with a blanket, picked up his shoes from the floor, and sat down to unwind. She opened her phone. No messages, no missed calls, just a notification about a new city tax that would raise her water bill. The next morning came too soon. Janice arrived early again, 30 minutes before her shift. She liked the stillness of the building before it woke up, the way the air smelled before the elevators opened. She made her way to her locker and opened it with the usual mechanical motion, only to stop short. Inside was a small paper bag, neatly folded, her name written on it in clean block letters. She glanced around. No one else was nearby. Her fingers hesitated, then reached inside. A pair of new gloves, a sandwich, still warm, wrapped in foil, and a sticky note that read, "For the woman who works with grace, even when the world forgets how to see." Janice stood frozen for a moment. She stared at the gloves, then the sandwich. She brought it to her nose. Fresh eggs, melted cheese, real bread. She didn't cry, but she smiled. A small, quiet, radiant smile that reached her eyes and spread to the corners of her mouth like sunlight creeping across a floor. From the security office, Adam watched her reaction on the feed. He leaned back in his chair and allowed himself a slow breath. Small steps, he thought. No rush. The building, meanwhile, continued its rhythm. Clients arrived. Phones rang. Elevators chimed. But something had shifted. Something subtle. A new thread in the weave. Janice folded the note and tucked it into her locker behind a photo of Malik. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel quite so invisible. And somewhere, beyond the reach of elevators and luxury, something inside her began to believe, just a little, that perhaps being seen was not the same as being exposed, that perhaps being seen by the right person could be the start of something far more powerful than anyone like her had been taught to expect. The days that followed the mysterious gift in her locker unfolded with the same routine precision that governed Janice's life, but something inside her had subtly begun to shift. The hallway, where she usually changed into her work gear, no longer felt quite as cold. The gloves on her hands no longer itched with age and wear. The breakfast sandwich, though long gone, left behind a memory of warmth that carried her through harder moments with more ease than she would ever admit. Each morning, she found herself arriving just a few minutes earlier than usual, lingering in the dim quiet before the building stirred, standing beside her mop cart with her palms wrapped around a cup of instant coffee she'd begun brewing at home. Her shoulders were still tired, her body still sore, but there was something in her expression now, a calmness, a steady pulse of purpose that made the minutes feel less like survival and more like progress. The notes began appearing once a week, folded carefully, placed between her extra towels or under a bottle of disinfectant. They never contained a name, only short phrases written in neat, precise lettering. You matter, even when they pretend not to see. This building shines because of you. Keep going. You're stronger than they think. Janice never mentioned them to anyone. She didn't want to invite speculation or mockery. Besides, it felt sacred somehow, like a secret pact between herself and some unseen force that believed in her for reasons beyond explanation. And that was enough. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that the notes, the sandwich, and the gloves had all come from Adam. Each message was carefully written during the quiet hours after midnight, when he remained behind in the control room long after the other security staff had gone home. It had become a ritual of sorts. Observe her during the day, note what might brighten her world, and act on it without being seen. He never left anything twice in the same place. He kept his movements quiet, untraceable. He was beginning to understand how invisibility worked, and how powerful it could be when wielded with purpose. From his office, he watched the way Janice moved through the building, not just how she cleaned, but how she existed. She remembered names, every janitor, every maintenance man, every mail clerk. She greeted them with warmth. She offered them pieces of her lunch, a Band-Aid from her pocket, a moment of stillness when their day felt heavy, and though many still saw her as a part of the furniture, Adam knew she was becoming the soul of the building. He wasn't alone in noticing. One afternoon, the head of facilities paused to mention Janice in a weekly briefing. She's always early. Polite. Floors haven't looked this good in months. No one replied, but Adam made a quiet note in the margin of his meeting printout. That same week, he arranged for her supply cart to be replaced. The old one squeaked with every turn and had a bent wheel that always caught on the elevator gap. The new cart arrived without a note, without fanfare. Janice blinked when she saw it. It was bright gray, with smooth rubber wheels and deep compartments. Her name was embossed on a small plastic tag affixed to the handle. She stood by it for a moment, her hands resting gently on the clean metal. She looked around the hallway, then up at the camera overhead, and whispered a soft, "Thank you," though she didn't know who would hear it. That evening, as the building emptied out and the late shift prepared to clock in, Janice found herself in the break room, sipping from her chipped thermos and listening to the hum of the vending machine. Tina, the long-standing senior cleaner, entered and glanced at her with thinly veiled suspicion. "You're lucky," she said after a pause. "New gloves, new cart. What's next? Your own office?" Janice didn't respond. She simply looked back down at her tea. Tina sat across from her and leaned forward. "Don't get too comfortable. This place doesn't lift people like us. It just lets us clean up after them." Janice smiled gently, though the words stung. "Maybe so," she said, "but I still clean it like it's mine." Tina scoffed, stood up, and walked out without another word. Her footsteps echoed in the hallway long after she was gone. The next day, Catherine noticed the whispers. She had returned to the boutique earlier than usual, irritated by a photographer who'd canceled a session. While she adjusted her display mannequins, she overheard one of her stylists whispering about that janitor and some kind of promotion coming. Her head snapped toward them so fast the assistant shrank back. "What janitor?" Catherine asked, her voice sweet but sharp. The stylist, startled, stumbled over her words. I don't know her name. Just, someone said she's been getting attention from upper floors. They replaced her gear. People are talking." Catherine's lips tightened. It couldn't be. She descended into the lobby a few hours later and stood by the curved glass railing, peering down like a hawk surveying her prey. And there, near the entrance, was Janice, kneeling beside a planter, carefully wiping the smudges from the marble. The new cart gleamed beside her. Her posture was straight, her expression peaceful. Catherine's fingers gripped the rail so tightly her nails left crescent moons in her palm. Back in her office, she paced for nearly an hour, muttering to herself. She didn't understand why the sight of that woman, still in a janitor's uniform, still on her knees, filled her with unease. Perhaps it was the dignity, or the quiet strength, or the faint murmur of recognition that what she had done that morning in the car, the splash, the laughter, was not forgotten after all. Later that week, Adam saw Janice by the freight elevator, struggling to lift a heavy bucket into the cart. Without thinking, he crossed the hallway and offered to help. She turned, startled, and hesitated before accepting. "Thank you. Adam, right?" He nodded. "Yeah, I've seen you around. You're here early a lot." She smiled. "And you're always holding that clipboard." "It's my shield," he joked lightly. "Keeps me looking important." They both laughed softly. It was the first shared moment between them that felt normal, not orchestrated, not watched from behind a camera. He didn't linger. He helped, smiled again, and left. That night, Janice wrote in the tiny notebook she kept in her nightstand, just a line or two. She never wrote much, only enough to remind herself that she existed beyond the work, that her life was worth documenting, even in fragments. Today, someone helped me. I didn't ask, and he didn't look down at me. He just helped. It stayed with her longer than she expected. Days turned into a week, then 2. The rhythm of life beat on, mop, scrub, polish, repeat. But each day carried a new thread of something unspoken, a feeling, maybe, a question, or perhaps the quiet realization that someone was watching, not to judge, but to understand. The notes continued, the kindnesses multiplied, and somewhere above it all, Catherine seethed. But the story was no longer just hers to control. The signs were subtle at first, small ripples in the surface of routine. Janice noticed it when Tina stopped acknowledging her in the hallway, turning her face slightly away as if her presence left a bitter taste in the air. She noticed it when the smiles from the front desk staff grew tighter, shorter, too swift to feel sincere. Even the maintenance crew she once joked with in the loading dock had begun to fall silent when she approached. Conversations halted mid-sentence, eyes averted. She had no evidence, no proof, only the growing weight of suspicion settling in her chest like damp clothes that refused to dry. What began as invisible kindnesses, new gloves, a sturdy cart, warm notes hidden in her locker, had bloomed into quiet hostility from her peers. As if every small gift she'd never asked for was counted against her, not as a blessing, but as an accusation. In their eyes, she was no longer simply a cleaner doing her job. She had become a target for speculation. The whispers started to follow her. She heard them in the break room behind half-shut doors and snickers that stopped too quickly. Phrases like, "someone must like her," or "she knows how to play the game." She told herself not to listen, not to let their words settle in her soul. But words had a way of slipping past armor, no matter how thick. The worst of it came when she found her backup uniform missing from her locker. In its place was a note scrawled in pencil. "Better wash your back, princess. The spotlight doesn't last forever." She crumpled the paper quietly and threw it away, but she didn't forget. Adam, for his part, was not blind to the change. He had seen this before, in boardrooms, in shareholder circles, even at his elite university. The moment someone undeserving of cruelty received kindness, those who had grown bitter in their own lives began to sharpen their envy into blades. He watched the way the hallway emptied when Janice entered, the way people left rooms with her still in them. His guilt burned under his skin. He hadn't expected this. His actions were meant to lift her, not isolate her. He had hoped goodness, even offered in secret, would ripple outward and inspire more of the same. But he had underestimated the cost of visibility for someone like her. Still, he continued quietly. He arranged for her to receive a commendation from the facilities department, a printed certificate recognizing her exceptional service. It was small, harmless on the surface, but when the framed paper appeared on the staff bulletin board beside the time clock, the response was immediate. Tina stared at it for a long time that morning, her jaw clenched. She didn't speak to Janice during their entire shift. By the end of the week, the shift calendar was mysteriously rearranged. Janice's name was erased from 2 of her usual sections and reassigned to a more chaotic wing of the building, Conference Wing D, infamous for its constant spills and event turnover. No explanation. No justification. She took the news without argument. She cleaned more and slept less. Malik noticed the bags under her eyes and began waking up before his alarm, quietly fixing himself breakfast so his mother could sit a moment longer. She never complained. She never asked questions, but inside, a slow-burning ache began to grow. She wasn't sure if it came from the mop handle digging into her palm or the silence that now greeted her wherever she went. Then came the incident. It was a rainy Monday morning, the kind of morning where shoes squeaked on linoleum and umbrellas dripped in every corner. The lobby had just been polished the night before, by Janice as usual, but she had been pulled away mid-shift to assist in the loading bay. When she returned 2 hours later, a crowd had formed around the main reception desk. A guest had slipped. A woman in expensive heels had fallen hard on the wet tile, her handbag skidding across the marble like a thrown frisbee. Staff hovered around her, anxious and whispering. The facilities manager, red-faced and barking orders, demanded to know who had last cleaned the floor. A junior staff member hesitated, then pointed. Janice. She was on schedule for the lobby last night. The rest happened quickly. Too quickly. Janice was summoned into the manager's office. The door closed behind her like a vault. Questions came in rapid succession. Why wasn't the area dry mopped? Was the caution sign placed? Did she check the floor before she left? She answered calmly. She explained the interruption, the redirection to another floor, the gap in coverage. But her voice, usually steady, cracked slightly when she said she hadn't finished because she had been asked to cover for someone else. The manager, a man who'd rarely spoken more than 2 words to her in the past year, folded his arms and stared hard. You understand the liability, Janice? This could cost the building a lawsuit. I need to know if you neglected protocol. I didn't, she said. I'm placing you on temporary review, he interrupted. Pending investigation. For now, you're off floor duty. She sat very still. The walls of the office seemed to tilt. Outside the window, the rain tapped lightly against the pane like the fingernails on a desk. She nodded once. No tears, no protest. When she stepped out of the office, her hands shook. She returned to her locker, changed in silence, and left without a word. The building loomed behind her like a fortress with no doors. That night, Adam was in his office when the report came through. He read it twice, then demanded to see the security footage from the lobby. The first 20 minutes showed nothing. Then a figure appeared on the screen. Tina. Moving down the hallway, looking over her shoulder, she paused beside the janitor's cart, reached into a cleaning tray, and swapped 2 bottles. She looked directly into the camera once, only once, and smirked. The footage ended with the guest's fall. Adam stood very still. He picked up his phone and called the manager. The next morning, Janice received a summons from HR. They sat her down, hands folded politely, and told her the review had been concluded. The accident had been reclassified. She was not at fault. They didn't mention the video. They didn't mention Tina. But when she walked through the basement that day, the silence was louder than ever. Tina's locker was open, empty, her name scraped off with a knife. Janice returned to the floor with no announcement. She received no apologies. No one welcomed her back. But her cart was there, her gloves waiting, and her badge still unlocked the doors. And that, she thought, was enough. Adam watched from afar, not approaching, not speaking. He wanted to, desperately, but he sensed she needed space. She didn't know he had saved her, but he knew. And that was all that mattered. High above, in her boutique, Catherine scrolled through her phone and frowned. A grainy photo had been posted to a local blog. Her car, the puddle, the splash, frozen in time. The caption read, "Some people think money erases manners. It doesn't." The image had no names, But the comments had theories. Some guessed, some recognized the model of the car, others began connecting dots. She closed the article quickly, her chest tight. For the first time in years, Catherine didn't feel untouchable. And somewhere deep within the building she used to rule by reputation alone, the woman she had once tried to humiliate stood taller than ever, quiet, steady, and still climbing. The air in the Crownmark Business Center carried a different weight after the incident. It wasn't a loud shift, not one that echoed through halls with declarations or apologies, but it was there. A quiet correction in the current, as though the building itself had taken a breath and exhaled something heavy. The lobby, once the stage of Janice's near dismissal, now shimmered beneath her polish, immaculate and silent. And yet, the silence had changed. It was no longer empty. It was charged. Watched. Janice returned to her duties with the same precision she had always carried, but something in her posture had stiffened, not in defeat, but in control. She knew now that there were eyes on her, not all of them kind, and that even the cleanest reputation could be soiled by envy. But she also knew that someone had protected her. She didn't know who. No one told her why Tina was gone, or who had ordered the cameras checked. No one admitted anything, but she knew she hadn't fallen alone. Someone had been there to catch her. Adam saw her only in glimpses now. He kept his distance, not wanting to insert himself into the aftermath too quickly. But each time she passed, he noted the way her eyes held their gaze a little longer. Not suspicious, not cold, just aware. As if she had begun piecing together something she couldn't yet name. And he couldn't blame her. She had been burned before. It was during a late afternoon shift that their paths crossed again in more than passing. Janice had been asked to tidy the lounge near the executive suites, a space rarely visited by janitorial staff unless specifically requested. When she arrived, expecting to clean up from a private meeting, she found the room empty, except for one man seated in an armchair near the window, thumbing through a folded newspaper. She hesitated, unsure if she had walked in prematurely, but he looked up and offered a polite smile. "Nothing to clean today," Adam said gently. "I asked them to send you." Her heart skipped. "Me?" He stood and walked toward her, casual but certain. "I wanted to thank you for what you did during the flooding last month. I saw the reports. You covered 3 departments by yourself." Janice blinked. "That was just my job." "No," he said, folding the newspaper and setting it down. "It was more than that." She didn't know what to say, so she busied herself straightening a pillow on a nearby chair. "It's a lot of building to care for. Someone has to." He nodded. "Do you enjoy it?" She gave a soft, uncertain laugh. "No one dreams of mopping floors, but I'm grateful. It's honest work. It pays the bills. That's more than some people get." He studied her face, his own expression quiet. "If you could do anything, what would it be?" Janice froze. It wasn't the kind of question she was used to. Not anymore. Not since life had narrowed her choices to survival and obligation. She looked at him carefully. "I used to want to manage a place like this, study hospitality, be the one setting the standards instead of just cleaning up after them. And now? Now I work. I save. I make sure my son has food and shoes. Dreams take energy. Mine are resting for a while." Adam nodded slowly, tucking her words into the folds of memory. He didn't press further. Instead, he offered a small smile and excused himself, leaving her alone with the echo of a conversation she hadn't expected and wasn't sure how to feel about. That night, he sat at his desk and began drawing up a plan. He contacted a local college with a reputable hospitality program. He asked for sponsorship terms. He arranged private funding. By the time the sun rose, Janice's scholarship was not just an idea. It was a line item on a contract waiting to be signed. But he knew it wasn't time yet. Not without more groundwork. Not without earning her trust. Elsewhere, in an upscale wine bar across town, Catherine sat with a glass of red and a sour mood. She had seen the comments online, the blurry photo of the splash, the insinuations. She had dismissed them at first. Then she'd tried to bury them. But they lingered, reposted, recirculated, annotated with cruel accuracy. And worst of all, they refused to fade. Now she sat across from her father at a high-gloss marble table, her nails tapping impatiently against the stem of her glass. "Someone is targeting me," she said flatly. "First the photo, now whispers. People are acting like I kicked a baby." Her father, a man of cold elegance and deliberate speech, raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps they're just holding up a mirror?" Catherine scoffed. "Don't start. I haven't done anything wrong." "Sometimes," he said, sipping his wine, "not doing something kind can be just as damaging as doing something cruel." She looked away. The truth in his voice made her chest tighten. Back at Crownmark, Janice arrived to find another note tucked inside her locker. This time, there was no gift. Just paper, folded carefully. "Keep shining. The world sees you, even if people pretend not to." She stared at it for a long time, then folded it again and placed it beneath her ID badge. She didn't know who left them. She had stopped trying to guess, but she carried their words with her like armor. It was in the weeks that followed that rumors truly began to spread. Some said she was dating someone powerful. Others claimed she had dirt on the management. A few simply muttered that she was getting favors she didn't earn. Janice tried to ignore them, but the air around her was thick with suspicion. One day, as she finished wiping down the glass on the 21st floor, the elevator chimed behind her and a familiar voice made her freeze. "You're Janice, right?" She turned slowly. Catherine stood in heels and a coat far too glamorous for the weather. Her sunglasses perched atop her head like a crown. But her smile was thin, calculated. Janice didn't respond. "You've caused quite the stir," Catherine continued, walking closer. "People think I'm some kind of villain now, just because you stood near a puddle." Janice's brow furrowed. "I didn't cause anything." "Didn't you?" Catherine's voice hardened. "Playing the victim works wonders, doesn't it? I barely remember your face, but now the whole city thinks I tried to kill you with a mud puddle." Janice looked her dead in the eye. "I never asked for pity. I just wanted to work." Catherine laughed once, sharp and bitter. "And you think Ethan sees you? He's like every other rich man. He'll get bored. Don't confuse attention with care, sweetie." With that, she turned and disappeared into the elevator. Janice stood motionless for a long time. The walls around her gleamed. Her reflection stared back from the polished surface, and for the first time in months, doubt crept in. But later that day, her break led her to the lobby cafe, where Adam waited. He stood as she entered and gestured to the table. A folder lay neatly in the center. "What's this?" she asked cautiously. "A scholarship," he said. "Full training in hospitality. Starts next month. You'd still work here part-time if you want." Janice's hands trembled. "Why me?" "Because you never asked for anything," he said, "and you deserve everything." She looked down at the folder, then at him. Her eyes burned, not from pain, but from the weight of being seen. Far across the room, unnoticed by them both, Catherine watched. Her nails dug into her palms. The girl she had tried to humiliate was rising. And nothing, no power, no money, no rumor, could stop it now. The envelope with the scholarship sat on Janice's nightstand for 2 days before she finally opened it again. She had read every word the day Adam gave it to her, but she hadn't let herself believe it. Not fully. Not when so many things in her life had slipped through her fingers before they had the chance to take root. She had memorized the words by now: full tuition, part-time work options, mentorship program, but it was the final sentence that haunted her. You have been selected not for who you know, but for who you are. She held that envelope like a lifeline, afraid to pull herself up in case the rope snapped. Malik noticed a change in her that night. She was quieter than usual, more still. When he asked her if she was okay, she simply nodded and said she was tired. But he wasn't fooled. He wrapped his small arms around her waist and said softly, "You're gonna be something big, Mama. I can feel it." His words stuck with her longer than the paperwork did. By the end of the week, Janice had signed and returned the scholarship acceptance, met with the program coordinator, and been given a new shift schedule that allowed for evening classes. It all happened so fast she barely had time to process it. She kept expecting someone to take it all back, to say it had been a mistake. But no one did. And Adam? Adam stayed close, but not too close. He didn't hover or press. Instead, he found reasons to pass by her new work area, checking on something or carrying paperwork. Each time they spoke, his voice was casual, but his eyes carried a different weight. Something careful and unspoken, like a secret he wasn't ready to share. Janice didn't ask why he had done it. She wasn't sure she could bear the answer, whatever it was. Pity, charity, guilt, they all felt the same when handed from people above. But with Adam, it felt different. Warmer, earned, maybe. She began her classes the following Monday. The first day, she arrived in a borrowed blazer and freshly ironed blouse, nervous to the point of nausea. The lecture hall was filled with young professionals, most of them in business attire, laptops open and expensive pens twirling between fingers. Janice sat near the back, notebook in hand, trying not to shrink beneath the weight of their glances. But once the professor began speaking about customer psychology, operational flow, team leadership, she straightened her shoulders. This was her world too. She had lived the back end of hospitality long enough to know it better than anyone in the room, and slowly, week by week, she began to rise within that space, not by charm or connection, but by clarity and resilience. At work, her responsibilities shifted. Management began requesting her opinion on lobby layouts, customer complaint logs, even lighting choices. The hotel director asked her to train new staff. Her co-workers, some of whom had once ignored her, now approached with questions and tentative admiration. But not all had changed. Tina returned from suspension quieter, but not repentant. She didn't speak to Janice, nor did she interfere again, but her stares lingered like shadows on bright days. Janice kept her focus forward. Meanwhile, Catherine was unraveling. The article about the splash had not gone away. Though it hadn't named her, the comments section did. People shared their stories, tagged her boutique's social media, and began calling her a bully in coded terms. Her team tried damage control, charity posts, photo ops, but the tone had shifted. The public had begun to see through the gloss. Worse still, she had become a ghost in Adam's world. He no longer returned her calls. No more invitations to galas or gallery openings. When she ran into him in the building's corridor one afternoon, he offered a polite nod and continued walking, like she was one of the crowd, like she didn't matter. She blamed Janice, quietly at first, then with fury. In a last-ditch attempt to regain control, she paid a gossip blogger to publish a hit piece, Janitor to Girlfriend, inside the gold-digging scheme of a building empire heiress. The article was venomous. It included blurry photos of Janice and Adam near the cafe, claimed she had orchestrated the scholarship, and hinted at a manufactured romance designed to elevate her status. It spread like wildfire. The next day, Janice arrived to work with eyes on her from every corner. Whispers, snickers, a few thinly veiled comments from front desk staff. She tried to hold her head high, but by noon her hands trembled and her stomach ached. She left early, claiming illness, and spent the afternoon curled on the couch with Malik, trying not to cry in front of him. Adam saw the article that evening. He didn't hesitate. He called a press conference the next morning. Standing in front of reporters and flashing cameras, he spoke plainly, without notes or handlers. Janice Allen is not a gold digger. She is the most hard-working, honest woman I've ever met. Anyone who believes otherwise should question what they value, money or character. I stand by her fully and without apology. The statement was clipped and shared across media platforms within the hour. The response was swift. Support flooded in. Former tenants of Crownmark posted their own stories of her kindness. Former guests praised her professionalism. The tide turned, again. Later that evening, a knock came at Janice's door. She opened it to find a delivery man holding a single red rose and a small envelope. Inside was a note in Adam's handwriting. Let the world whisper. I'll always speak your truth. Janice held it to her chest, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just being defended. She was being chosen. The next week, her instructor at the hospitality program asked her to stay after class. You've got a head for this, he said. You ever consider leading training? There's a management cohort forming next quarter. I'd like to recommend you. She was speechless. She nodded. At work, the general manager began including her in meetings. He asked her what she thought about vendor contracts, holiday schedules, customer trends. She wasn't just a cleaner anymore. She wasn't even just a student. She was a voice that mattered. Across the city, Catherine faced consequences she hadn't imagined. The gossip blog was traced back to her PR firm. Her father confronted her in his office, the door closing with a heavy click behind him. You didn't just hurt that woman, he said coldly. You embarrassed this company. You embarrassed yourself. I was protecting our name, Catherine snapped, but her voice lacked the conviction she once wielded so easily. No, you were protecting your ego, and now you've lost everything. He froze her accounts, suspended her from the company board, dismissed her assistant. And with that, the walls of her world crumbled. No private drivers, no stylists, no curated relevance. Just silence. Back at Crownmark, Adam invited Janice to dinner, not as a sponsor, not as a secret admirer, but as a man who simply wanted to sit across from a woman who had changed his life. He picked her up in a modest car, no chauffeurs. They dined on the rooftop of a quiet bistro overlooking the city. It wasn't extravagant, but it was theirs. Over candlelight and soft music, Janice looked at him and asked the question that had waited in her chest for months. Why me? He smiled, his gaze steady. Because in a world full of noise, your silence spoke the loudest. And I heard you. They walked home slowly, hand in hand, past the spot where everything began. The road was dry now, smooth. Janice paused and looked down at the place where the muddy water had once soaked her clothes and her pride. She tried to drown me in this, she whispered. Adam looked at her. and you bloomed instead. Without another word, she slipped off her shoes and walked barefoot across the asphalt. He followed. Two souls, once separated by class, status, and silence, now moved side by side. Not a fairy tale, not a fantasy, just the truth. Sometimes the worst moments of your life are just the beginning of your best ones. End of Chapter 6. The evening air was thick with anticipation, filled with the quiet electricity that comes before something grand, something unforgettable. Crownmark Business Center, now decorated with silk banners and crystal chandeliers for its 20th anniversary gala, no longer looked like the cold fortress Janice Allen had once walked into, unseen and soaked in muddy water. Tonight, the building was alive, golden with light and alive with music, the echo of violins climbing toward the domed ceiling like whispers of celebration. Every surface glistened. Every arrangement had been placed to perfection. Waiters in crisp black uniforms circled the room with silver trays, offering champagne and canapes to guests who shimmered in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. But there was only one person the room truly watched when she walked in. Janice stood at the entrance of the grand ballroom in a simple sky-blue gown, its soft fabric flowing with her movements like it had been sewn from the sky itself. She wore no diamonds, no luxury brand stitched across her chest. Her shoes were modest, her jewelry minimal, a single gold bracelet Malik had given her for her birthday, engraved with the words, "You never gave up." Her hair was pulled into a smooth bun, not to impress, but to carry the quiet pride of someone who had built herself from the ground up. And when she stepped forward, there was no announcement, no spotlight. Still, people turned. Heads turned not because of spectacle, but because of something rarer, something more real. She had a presence now, not loud or demanding, but solid, grounded, unshakable. It was the kind of presence that made people whisper not out of gossip, but reverence. She was the story they'd read about. The woman who had once mopped the floors they walked on. The one who had risen without stepping on anyone to do it. At her side stood Adam, not in his usual corporate armor, but in a classic, understated suit. His tie matched the blue of her gown. He didn't lead her in or walk ahead. He walked with her, proud, silent, completely hers. As they crossed the room together, soft applause began to ripple. Not coordinated, not planned, just a natural wave of recognition moving from table to table, like everyone suddenly remembered how rare it was to see someone climb with grace instead of greed. Janice blushed softly, but kept walking, her posture tall. The hotel director stepped onto the stage and tapped the microphone gently. The room quieted. Tonight, we not only celebrate 20 years of success, but we honor the people who have made this place what it is. Not just the executives and designers, but the hands and hearts behind every polished surface, every guest's comfort, every corner of this building. He paused, looking out across the room. There is one person here who has reminded us what that truly means. He gestured toward her. Janice Allen, would you please join me? A heartbeat passed, then another. Janice's feet moved before her thoughts could catch up. She stepped toward the stage slowly, the applause growing louder. Adam squeezed her hand once before letting go. As she reached the podium, the director handed her a glass plaque inscribed with her name and a simple title, "For Strength, Humility, and the Spirit that Lifts Us All." Her fingers curled around the award with disbelief. She looked out at the crowd, at faces she'd once only seen from a mop's eye view, and then she spoke. "A year ago," she said, her voice low but steady, "I walked into this building soaking wet, covered in mud, wearing shoes with holes in them. I was invisible. Not because I wanted to be, but because people didn't look. The room stilled. I never asked for anything more than a fair chance. Not a favor, not pity. Just the chance to work hard and be seen for it. And somehow, that happened. Because one act of cruelty and one act of kindness collided, and everything changed. She glanced toward Adam, who stood at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, his gaze unwavering. I don't stand here because I'm lucky. I stand here because I kept going, even when no one noticed. Because someone believed in me before I could believe in myself. And because I learned that dignity doesn't come from titles or clothes, it comes from refusing to let anyone steal your worth. She stepped back. The applause that followed was no longer polite. It was thunderous. From the back of the room to the chandeliered ceiling, the sound filled every space that had once tried to silence her. Even the staff, the ones in black uniforms who lined the walls, clapped louder than the rest. From across the ballroom, behind a veil of guests and floral arrangements, Catherine watched. She stood alone in a champagne-colored gown, her expression unreadable. No cameras followed her now. No stylist adjusted her hair. The empire she had once clung to had slipped through her fingers like sand, and the woman she'd tried to reduce with mud now stood on a stage she couldn't touch. Her hands trembled. She took a sip of wine to hide it, but nothing could mask the truth anymore. After the event, the night didn't end with music or fireworks. Instead, Janice found herself on the rooftop garden of the building, alone with the stars. She held the plaque in her lap and looked out over the city, lights flickering like distant fireflies. She thought of her mother, long gone. She thought of Malik, asleep in his bed with his arm curled around his stuffed bear. She thought of the girl she had been, the one scrubbing baseboards with swollen knuckles, afraid to ask for more. A soft sound broke her thoughts. Adam stepped onto the rooftop carrying 2 cups of hot cocoa. He handed one to her without a word, then sat beside her on the bench. "You're quiet," he said eventually. "I'm just overwhelmed," she whispered. "Is this really happening?" He nodded. "Every piece of it. You earned." She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "I used to think people like you didn't see people like me." "I didn't always," he admitted. "But watching you reminded me of my mother. She raised me alone, cleaned other people's messes, never asked for thanks. I owe everything I am to a woman like you." Janice looked at him, startled. "You never talk about her." "Because people like to believe I built myself alone. But the truth is, women like you build everything." They sat in silence after that, sipping cocoa and watching the lights. It was the kind of quiet that needed no filling, the kind that only exists between people who have seen each other fully. The next morning, during the building's monthly staff meeting, the general manager officially announced Janice's promotion to hospitality coordinator in training. He described her academic excellence, her leadership, her humility. The room applauded again. Even those who had once whispered behind her back now clapped with pride. But not everyone clapped. Later that day, in a private office, Catherine burst through the doors of her father's office, heels clacking against the marble, fury blazing across her face. "Why is everyone talking about her?" she snapped. "She's just a cleaner." Her father set down his pen slowly and looked up at her, his eyes colder than she had ever seen them. "No," he said, "she's not. She's a leader. She's a story people believe in. And you—" He paused. "You still have a lot of growing up to do." Catherine opened her mouth, then closed it. There were no words left. Nothing she could say that hadn't already been buried beneath the truth. That evening, Adam walked Janice home for the first time. They didn't take a car. They didn't need one. They strolled under the soft glow of street lamps, their steps in rhythm, their hands brushing and then intertwining like it had always been meant to happen. When they reached her apartment, Malik was already waiting by the door. He rushed forward, smiling so wide it nearly hurt. "I heard you laughing," he said, launching himself into Janice's arms. Then, looking up at Adam, he asked, "Is he your friend?" Adam knelt down and smiled. "Hi, Malik. I've heard a lot about you." "She's my everything," Janice said, holding her son close. Adam looked at them both, a quiet awe in his eyes. He had known wealth, influence, prestige, but this was joy. This was real. As Malik went back inside, Janice walked Adam to the gate. The breeze ruffled her dress, and the glow from the lamp-post haloed her figure. "Janice," he said softly, "this all started with mud, but maybe it ends with something beautiful." Her heart thudded. "Maybe," she whispered, "maybe it's just the beginning." Weeks passed. The story spread, first in small blogs, then in news features. From mud to merit, the cleaner who inspired a billionaire. Headlines called her a modern Cinderella. Commenters called her an example. She hadn't asked for fame, she had asked for a chance. And somehow the world had listened. She still cleaned sometimes, not because she had to, but because it grounded her. Because it reminded her of who she was and what she'd survived. In the evenings, she attended classes. Her professors praised her insight, her discipline. They asked her to speak on panels. She gave interviews, but she never played the victim. She never spoke about Catherine by name. She just told the truth. Meanwhile, Adam visited often. Not with grand gestures or promises, but with presence. He helped Malik with homework, brought groceries without asking, took Janice's hand when the pressure became too much. Theirs was not a fairy tale, it was something better. One afternoon, Janice returned to the spot on the road where the splash had happened. The sidewalk had been repaired, the puddle was gone, the street was smooth. She slipped off her shoes again, standing barefoot just like that night. Adam joined her moments later, also barefoot. "What are you doing?" he asked gently. She looked down at the place that had once humiliated her, then looked up, eyes shining. "Leaving the last trace of who I used to be," she said, "and stepping fully into who I am now." He said nothing. He didn't need to. They walked forward, slowly, silently, not just as two people in love, but as something more. Proof that even when life throws mud, a flower can bloom, and sometimes it blooms so brightly the whole world stops to notice. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Check out the next video and explore other stories on the channel. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. It might be exactly what they need today.